Ok, ça change tous les jours sur YouTube comment streamer, mais ça peut marcher. Hein.
Ça va? Ok.
Tu peux regarder.
Okay. So allow see. Okay.
Can we start?
Okay. Allow see. Yeah. Okay.
Nobody's taking.
We will very quick. Okay. So the idea is about it's a bit discussion we had like in the last working group about how to interact with plugin developers. The interaction has been not very good socially. It's mostly a social problem, I think. And well, we wrote this mail, if you remember. So yes, I mean, and in fact, the problem is many works are abandoned. And it's research, like people do plugins. Like for instance, it's funny. Yesterday, I got a mail from a person I met 5 years ago in the Oregon school, like telling me, Emilio, want to use the RelAlgebra plugin. It's called RelAlgebra, right? Which is supported by Coq 8.5. And I told her, you better install Coq 8.5 because this is totally unsupported today. Back Damian, I think he's busy, right? So yeah, many things are abandoned and are very useful. For instance, parametricity was on the edge, and the plugins. I feel it's a bit of disconnection. Still, people do their own thing. Like as I mentioned yesterday, not to repeat, they do like in Coq 8.4 a plugin. They start a plugin today to write in 8.4 or 8.5, and then of course then you discover a constant and this stuff, and you want to die after. And I'm talking about pretty large plugins. So yes, this I think there was virtually no answer to this. Okay, so this shows more stuff has to be done. Okay, and then the last slide is so maybe an idea I thought, and then the last slide, as I promised. So then an idea I thought is will be to have to extend a bit more this idea of the call and have something I call the Coq developer plugin, because I think usually like this social stuff is like the summer of course and this stuff. So if you want to have the people writing plugins, which is not a lot of people, Jason writes some plugins like of course Beta and Node at the University of Washington, and yes, and I was particular. Maybe that was what scratched my itch. Like the people at the University of Washington, seeing how they were totally disconnected from the thing here, and was like, okay, we do our thing, and we don't. And we were telling them like in Twitter. By the way, we should open a Coq Twitter account, Coq Proof Assistant or at Twitter or something. But that's another topic. I removed it from the program, opening a Coq Twitter account. But yet I was disappointed because I thought, what the hell is going on? They're starting to write a new plugin, and yes, he wrote, and they wrote, whatever. But I was disappointed there was no more collaboration or more like, oh, how I do this? They're going to do their own thing. So yeah, I thought that maybe having a more official opportunity to say there is a Coq developer program that people doing plugins can apply to be in. And yes, and you get like a patch and say, okay, this plugin is part of the Coq plugin developer. And also for people joining this program, you promise like you will distribute with Coq, even if not in the repository. This idea we have, you promise you will put the plugin so when people don't know on Windows, your plugin will be an add-on. Of course, not officially, but it's in the distribution. And you provide like a standard support, like for people joining the program, you promise them that the kind of a bit of a standard support, even if this is the same as you get today if you're not in the program, because if anybody writes, people is going to help. So far has been the case. And yes, and the compromises, of course, for people wanting to get this badge and to be distributed. Yes, so this is in fact the same exact idea, just branding, the idea we have discussed many times. Because we have discussed this idea of distributing other people things like, because it's a practical concern in the distribution, but it's just putting a brand on it, or call it like, and yes, and the compromises is they have to keep the plugin on master, so on the continuous integration, okay? So if you want to be in this program, if your plugin is not in the continuous integration, you are not. And they need to listen a bit like, okay, to listen a bit like, for instance, if they are doing something very strange in the plugin, they are calling like some plugins, most of the plugins do something very strange at some point because the API has so many things that by probability you end up using something you're not supposed to do. And they should be basically maintain the development of master, right? And also I feel like when people want to join this program, there should be an initial application, so an initial betting, mostly of course about what the plugin is doing, if it makes sense to be something we want to spend our time on. I don't know, because I'm sure there will be silly plugins that maybe are not. Yeah, because, and of course, like the code, there should be a small code review, a small cleanup. Like we should say, okay, like we should like this is a joint effort to have a look at the plugin and this pull record into continuous plugin look at some suggestions. Try to see, for instance, if this small documentation on common operations on plugins is compliant and this stuff. Okay, so that's it. 5 minutes. Okay. Okay, are you happy? Or was too long?
This suggestion.
What is extended support?
This is something what we have today. It's just a marketing.
But, so the question is also in selection. So imagine you have a plugin. I know in many such cases, the purpose the way it's hooked in is completely crazy. It's not the right interface. It's interfacing with parser, building ASTs. Stuff like that. But the purpose makes sense. What do you say? Did you integrate it as is, or?
Yeah, we'll have a discussion. Obviously, we will try to. Personally, I think this will be in the review process. You will try to change the plugin in this.
Yeah, but imagine it's a lot of work. You basically need to rewrite all the.
Then I wouldn't take it personally, but I mean, if somebody is willing to step up for this plugin.
But it would not be integrated except if the cleanup is.
But this is my personal opinion. I mean, this is the idea. This I will be happy is even one person applies, because the problem of this is like maybe the problem is again we send another mail and we say we'll do a small page explaining this program and nobody joins. So then these questions, I think even if that person just wanted to join this, it will maybe at least I will try to help. I don't know, Machines. I don't know. Depends what the code is.
I'm confident some plugin writers would be interested in the distribution aspect. I'm sure it's a good argument for them. So,
yeah, but this we were doing anyways without the program. So at least with the program, we can tell, okay, we distribute, but you also take a commit. Man.
For instance, on Windows, I don't even have a story for them.
I think you overestimate the cost, because we don't even have. I think even just distributing badges would make a lot of people happy.
But with the badge comes
it's still a cost, because we have to select. And so that means reading. That means a lot of.
That's still okay. But my fear in practice, given the plugins I have in mind, is we can review, we can make a diagnosis of what should be written, but we don't have the manpower to actually do it. So either we say, please do this, but nobody can, and then we put the badge, or we don't put it because nobody can. Or we say, okay, then we put the badge anyway, and then the badge loses value.
Yeah,
for me, the badges have only a temporary value, and I don't know how to guarantee that.
But the badge means it doesn't mean inequality or anything. It just means there was a talking between the developer and the plugin. There was a communication. It's a social aspect.
If you say approved by CogDev or something like that, it's
no. Okay, this is too strong, maybe. Yeah, this is too strong. I agree.
About it, it's different from approved.
Yeah. So maybe it should say this plugin member of the code developer program. Plugin developer
and then
program.
there is the other question, which is plugins that are currently distributed with Cog. Are they approved by CogDev?
Obviously, yes.
So it means that any plugin that has a quality comparable to functional injection, for instance, can get the badge. If you don't want to.
No, but
historical reasons.
But
This
is
always.
not about quality.
The plugins the code we maintain, we endorse it.
But this is not about quality. I think you're seeing it wrong. This is not about quality. It's about social. Social development.
And I'm fine with this angle, but then it needs to be made clear. And saying like approved by CogDev sounds like, or even having that.
I mean,
sounds
I'm
like-
gonna bother if again, but mem with code, you don't need to look at the plugins. There are parts which are excellent and parts that are also that the code is worse. I mean, like every software system of this size. So looking at the quality, I think this is the wrong approach here.
No, but this is not what I'm saying. I'm saying just if you make up a badge, you create a badge, people will think it's about quality. If you're not very
No, because you can put into the faculty, into the small page of the developer program, you can put this only means like the writers of code should be a small of quality, a minimum of quality. Okay, a minimum standard, but you can tell like this is not part of the code project. It's a third-party plugin. It's not part of the code project.
But
There was like
we
a
have-
GStreamer example with like 3 categories of plugins, like the ones that are officially supported, the ones that are in the process, and the ones that are we don't know, but it's nice to have them, but we make no promises about maintaining them or something like that. Maybe we need this kind of categories.
But how many layers of these things are we going to have? Because we already have this open repository where people find a listing of everything that's being done, and we already do.
Yeah. But that doesn't work for Windows, if for instance.
Yeah.
No, but this is about like having the plugin people coordinate with code. So this batch means people coordinate developers.
Yes, like the commitment on both sides.
Yeah, to at least talk and try to make sure that at least and the plugin works on master. So that means that the plugin is actively maintained and in collaboration, even if we talk once a month, because for instance, for some plugins, and the cost is tricky because the cost that we are having by all plugins is not so clear because there are many questions of people on plugins and I cannot install on Windows. So the cost is not clear what is the trade-off.
I have two questions. One, I think it's a good idea to have more bandwidth with these people, especially across the ocean. But first question, do you have an idea of how many could?
Very few, because right now, like external developers, so this is a social initiative to try to get people more involved, and especially new people who is starting to work on code. Like for instance, you were seeing a few minutes ago, one guy who is starting again with the XML protocol, and I told him you should better use a different. I don't understand people it's like or students sometimes you tell the student with a good thing it's not a good thing to do anyways. So
there is things that exist and things that don't exist. People tend to use things that are already there.
We can start this.
No, things that are there. Sorry,
Around
disagree.
10. It's around 10, right? The number?
No, but it's like sorry, Coq 8.7 already exists, and people are using Coq 8.5.
The other one, the
So
other
also
question
existing.
is.
Yeah, but doesn't make sense. This is exactly my point. Sorry,
The other
Rico.
question is actually maybe a question for Maxime and Theo, or maybe we take the job of Theo today, is reasonably so I think that distributing a plugin, helping the distribution of a plugin is very valuable for the plugin developer, but it must fit with the release cycle. We're releasing like crazy now, okay? Very often.
Yeah, no,
with
has-
very short deadlines.
Has to be a master and into the continuous integration. Otherwise, yes, of course.
Very short deadlines only for minor release.
Yes, but I mean, if I have a plugin, you don't take the snapshot on the X and release. Okay, you release the version I tag as releasable.
Whatever you give to us in the continuous integration, of course.
And maybe
No,
my master is
no,
not.
that's not the right process.
So it's a bit. It requires extra synchronization with these people when we release.
There's something to be done. Like at the moment we release a beta, we say in 1 month we're gonna have a release. We need to have a release ready.
No, but-
or we
yeah.
don't-
No, but what Enrico has in mind, I think the problem would not be major versions, but rather minor releases. That would be trickier. But it means we need to guide them in their own release process probably,
Yeah,
and
but
in
we-
particular, they need to have stable branches.
Yeah, you need to synchronize with code. Yeah, but that's already the fact.
Yeah.
If you're a plugin writer, that's already the
the
fact.
version of their work that has to be synchronized with code is a stable one, while everybody.
Well, I say the one that the plugin, no, but I think Enrico does the one that the plugin writer chooses, because some plugin writers will choose to always have like a stable version in master.
Yeah, no, but
Yeah, it
imagine
depends.
we have a code distribution, which I think is a great idea. We release 8.7.0. Maybe we go back in the past. That's the distribution. then we do a minor release, 8.7.1 of the distribution. You clearly don't want, you also want to integrate only fixes in plugins.
Yeah, but obviously the plugin writer will open a branch, as Matthias says, for that. Yeah.
So we need, I think, a compromise is we need to have stable branches.
Hopefully.
We are talking without any concrete plan of action there. We don't even know how this distribution channel is going to work. If it's about Windows in particular, because on the other systems there is OPAM, then it depends what Michael is going to do to make this possible. And, he proposed already something that would support installing several versions of the same plugin or stuff like that. So it really depends on what he proposes to us. So I don't know why we are having this discussion right now. Makes no sense to me.
Yeah,
I understand your objection.
Yeah.
It's good to know that Michael is working on this, and at the same time try to see what we need to organize for contributors.
No, but no, I mean the specific of the release cycle. Stuff about does it need to be a stable branch, or does it need to be an experimental branch?
Okay. The details don't matter.
Sorry?
We are over-engineering the answer.
No.
Yeah, we are planning on top of nothing.
Right. Okay, no, but the details don't matter. What I meant is that probably we also need to find a compromise on like Enrico said, on release cycles.
That doesn't worry me because
we have something to propose before finding a compromise. For now,
I'm not saying I want to try to find a compromise now. I'm saying, so if you look, take a plugin like a candidate plugin, in my opinion, is QuickCheck. It's actively developed.
Interesting one.
I'm sure Benjamin will be happy if we can distribute it. I mean, I don't know. It would be a candidate, maybe. You have to imagine, okay, today they developed in one or two main branches and then experimental ones and things like that. It's clear that whatever the details are, we will need to have a release.
Yeah, Maxime, but Theo is right. But Theo is right. This is easy to solve. I mean, the problem is getting, in fact, people talking. Then you solve with them. Like, what are we going to achieve? This is a 5-minute conversation.
I'm not
Theo
saying
right.
it will be easy to solve, but I mean, we need to wait until we have something concrete to talk about.
The program, right?
Sorry?
What do you mean by concrete here? Like the program page?
No, I'm talking about the Windows channel distribution. This is a technical case.
Well, the technical thing. Yeah, okay, but this is easy to solve.
Because again, on Linux and OS X, you have OPAM, so
But I think you don't have the
Even
solution.
then, that's not necessarily the best way to get code for it.
that's not necessarily the best way, but it works. And right now, the main issue is with Windows.
But I think from a Windows point of view, at least the top seems to show it. The main service is not the distribution.
Yeah,
It's one of them. But it's
I'm
also
talking about
collaborating with the other.
Yeah, of course, like for instance, Massinse, I think QuickCheck is a good example. For sure, if we start to talk with the QuickCheck people, Coq is going to benefit a lot because they're very experienced researchers and developers. And also, it's very important because Coq today is missing many things. It's like you install Java and you have network libraries, HTML libraries. So Coq, for instance, equations yesterday, precisely, I pointed somebody to equations and he was amazed. It was how I didn't know about that. And of course, so where is this? This is replacing function program. I'm so happy. The guy tried equations and he was super happy in the Stack Overflow. You can go and check. Okay, so it's important. Quick check this stuff. It's cool. Maybe because I spend a lot of time in the Stack Overflow, it's really a pain for me. I would like to have a more complete distribution. I would like to point out to people, oh, I'm doing linear algebra, use .com. I need testing, use QuickCheck. You need to do cool pattern matching, use equations.
But by distribution, okay, just to be clear, today they can, if they are not on Windows, basically.
This is a big problem. I'm seeing many of them are Windows first.
Okay.
Many of them we're talking about the beginners, and it's a pain in the ass they have to install. It's like this other guy on GitHub. I can tell there are many examples. He was like, oh, I do require import whatever and doesn't work, and the guy thought he was writing the wrong command, and he told me, oh, I'm relieved. So distribution is important for me.
Yeah,
Yes,
but,
sorry.
Just a side remark, what we test on CI, it's a development version of the various
It's not so important. I think no, we test whatever. Of course, has to work with the current code.
It's not that.
But I will say depends on the
I
plugin
followed
writer.
9.7.1 in equations.
It should be a
Because we
candidate.
don't test the release. So I have release 12 for 9.7, and it's not tested by the release CI because I think equations was not added to the CI. But do we do tests of both the alpha versions of the stable versions already? Can we have both?
That's
But
right.
in the different branches. So in 8.7 you're testing the 8.7 versions of the plugins and master the master version. Can we do that already?
Can you repeat your question? I'm not sure I understood it.
Mine was over engineering.
No, but maybe we cannot support that because.
No, we do.
Well, maybe I think.
I don't know what you asked.
So the question is in 8.7 when you do backwards, do you test?
We don't test the question because you
Because
said
it
maybe-
does not test, yeah.
Sorry,
But you could have a branch.
I could test the question on 8.7. You would need to make a PR on 8.7. I don't backward CI PRs for plugins since it's specific for a given version. So I don't know if you have a branch for. So in this case, I know, but generally, I don't know
But
if
it is
you have a
fully-
branch for.
It is
8.7.
fully supported, the configuration in the file, but is also a version, so you have two files in two branches. So you can support it to different work.
And the answer to Hugo's question is we test whatever the plugin developer asks us to.
It should be a candidate for distribution though. So for instance, I will expect material if you have an experimental version of the equations, I will expect you have like the thing you would like to be released. So that's up to you. And then for instance, in your own CI testing, you can test many more. This is like you could test like have a matrix of 4 testing in equations and test your continuous integration experimental ones. I think in Coq should be something, if you intend to be distributed, should be something that in a sense is going to be what is going to be in the next release. Of course, this depends on the plugin because some plugin writers, they can have more stable than others, or some of them they just, okay, and some others will break. Of course, this is a question, but as you say, Theo, Japan, I think it's maybe not, well, it's maybe not so important now because first we need to get somebody interested in this. Okay, which is going to be hard.
When we test Unicode or Coquelicot, it's going to be the next release of these packages also. We are testing the master branch of these packages.
Yeah, but this is something a bit we need to go on around. Because the current testing, how it happened, is a totally random process because there were packages I already had in GSCOPE. Because I was distributing it in GSCOPE, and then I just went and added them at my own taste, at my own will, and without any kind of thing. I just say, okay, that's the stuff that I consider relevant.
Yes, but if there is an agreement with the developer.
No, we never talked to them.
We could decide what is tested.
We never talked to them, but then Guillaume said it's fine. This was all the discussion was, Guillaume, we have put this, okay.
I have the impression that we sidetracked from a technical point that may not have been so important. You started with this idea that what happens with Open does not work with in the Windows environment. I don't see why this matters. You want so this is a very abstract level. The exact working environment does not matter really. This is about people who are developing new ideas and new and then the details is that the details of what is the OS on which they are working. This is at an
There are two questions that are
this is the question that is completely independent.
There is a distribution to users of plugins who might be on Windows even if the developer is on Linux.
Yes.
And there is a question of the developer program.
So this is not a minor question, by no means. Distribution today is not at all in this. If we say one of the services we provide is helping plugin authors distribute their plugins. If we mean on Windows, it's much more than on any other OS, even the current solution.
I agree. It's much more of a promise. The community of users, the success of COP is such that the community of users is always going to ask too much from you than you can do. So you're always going to be frustrated because There's so much you would want.
No, but this is fine. We can do it. I'm sure we can do something. I'm just saying, if Windows didn't exist, it would be a bit empty.
But yeah.
I totally agree with you.
So
I totally agree with
I'm
you.
not so sure.
be careful about the. Of course, we would
But it's not.
we would want to have this kind of community management at the level of plugin developers. We would like to have, but be careful that you're going to you're going to put yourself under a lot of self-inflicted pressure if you really try to.
So I'm trying to understand what you're saying. Are you saying that we should not make this distribution?
I think you're doing your best. You already tried to think about it when you thought about doing this open distribution, and at that time you had the hope that the open distribution would be taken, the Windows problem would be taken care of by the open people. And this is slow to deliver.
But that's,
Are you thinking it will never deliver or what?
yeah.
But if it does, then it's
If-
not your problem.
if
And
but the
it's
pump
not
has
what
worked
you
okay.
do in 2 years from now, you're still going to be overwhelmed by the pressure.
If the pan work for now, but pan hasn't worked with this. Hasn't worked with plugins that they stop in maintenance, etc. and etc.
Yeah,
Pan
but
didn't
you,
work with
you,
that.
you took the example of algebra something.
Real
The
algebra.
guy who developed that thing is not working in academia anymore. He's a high school teacher.
Yeah, and so I'm saying again, once again, that this is strongly linked to the talk I'm having this
Yeah.
afternoon.
So
I'm very fine for moving this talk right
Yeah.
now if you want to
Yeah.
have
Yeah.
this discussion right now.
No, but in fact, this could be. How long was the talk scheduled?
I know.
25.
25
So
minutes.
maybe we'll make an extra.
Yeah, okay,
We'll have
so
it now,
take over, please.
and we'll see what we do in the afternoon.
Sounds like a
There
good
was an
idea.
empty slot now, so if you're fine.
I think it's good.
That's
Yeah, yeah,
Staying
it's
on
the
the
same
same
topic.
topic,
Is it okay, Mathieu?
I thought that I would talk, but it's fine.
No, but we switch.
Yeah.
So that you can fix your But Jean-Marie didn't want to talk.
Listen to
the
I can take it if
maybe
you
we
want.
can torture him.
I don't have
I can talk if you want,
No,
Mike.
no, it's not
That's fine, watch.
C'est bon?
Yeah, so I can actually answer.
Maxime, peut-être.
Non.
Est-ce qu'il y a un adapteur pour Théo?
HDMI stuff.
HDMI.
Ouais, c'est ça, ça se trouve qu'il n'a pas des. des
J'aurais
super.
dû prendre mon
Just to, for details about Windows, I'm talking with Michael. He has already set up some things that can solve plus
Je
plugins,
sais pas, peut-être.
like macro, like equations. I'm trying to test it on my machine and using it on my machine. It's working.
Yeah, I think it's a very, very good thing. And
Okay, so just 1 second. So, what is your a priori? If it's and Hugo's here, yeah, I have probably this large room locating everybody. So, a priori, what is your thought on this? Like, should we try to move forward? Would you like to take a few more weeks to?
What do you mean?
We're trying to set up the terms, a more concrete proposal for how the program will work. So we can review it. Do you think we should try to do it, or maybe what is the idea?
Who has time to work on that?
Yeah? Pardon?
Who will put energy in that?
Well, for drafting these small conditions, I can do it, and for I can draw the the badge.
Maybe you wait until purple and discuss with
Non, mais je sais pas qu'est-ce qu'il faut que je fasse.
but writing a draft.
Ça marche?
No, that's for
Ça
writing
marche.
the draft. That's for
Enfin, dans ce cas-là, ce que je vais faire, c'est que je vais.
Yeah, no, it's different, of course. Of course, before submitting an announcement, we need to have more discussion. This is clear.
Preparing the draft.
A priori, we should move forward a bit with this. Do you think,
I think so.
Hugo? Tu penses que ça vaut la peine? You push work moving forward with this? Or?
Je peux leur envoyer quand même à quelqu'un.
Ça me paraît simple. Petit tac comme langage choisi, de brancher. Ça donne une appli plus stable. Et puis ça donne tous les trucs.
So I have another big question. How to have a model where you require the name of the package, reverse the package without doing anything. This is a model I think we should aim to. Whatever it's distributed with or distributed by downloading somewhere.
Ouais, bon, j'arrive pas à trouver le
From the user point of view, what I want to do is just, I need this library, I do require the work. This would be the objective. Then can we do it? Can we do it on Windows? So there is always this question, does OPAM work on Windows? Some people say yes, some people say no, so I'm not able to. So what's the conclusion?
It does not work today, but there are other ways to install
Why do you say that it's not today? I have a Stack Overflow page here, which says how can I install OCaml with OPAM on Windows, and the message from Trungta, I don't know if you know it. We said that you can do it on Windows. So what it means, it doesn't work.
They don't advertise it as official.
Yes, if it works for me, what's the problem for us?
I think you will find it.
There are details to
Yeah.
it's not work. Support ID cannot be cleared or things like this. So Michael has a long email about this, I can see if you want.
So in fact,
Technically, this is not
We want to install Coq, we have compiled install Coq on Windows. Can we use OPAM as a package manager for Coq without caring anymore about the yes, on the plugin which that is compiled.
Yeah, but however, in fact, Hugo, there is an issue. If you go, for instance, to the JSCOP page, there is an issue already answer discussion of how to make in JSCOP automatic library port, which means when I type from Matcom whatever, Matcom is loaded on the background, and then it's so there are some technical problems and changes that code needs to be that happen. But actually, because of the way VO compilation works, it's tricky, so you need to have like a repository, and for JSCOP it's good. So I agree with this, but this is, I think, is not doable with OPAM for some technical, or with OPAM will be like a very tricky solution. But I totally, so I think the best hope we have, in fact, is to, the best hope we have is to try to distribute on Windows a FAT package, not like the Java SDK, but a FAT package, so at least.
Yeah, for OS X as well.
Yeah, for OS X.
You might just want to say to users, download this, you have.
Come on, it's not a problem that Coq takes 1 GB today. I think our best hope for now was to get in a solution for the next release, is to distribute a FAT package.
On avait quelque chose qui
Hopefully,
marchait.
at some point, we can
J'ai voulu faire
do
quelque
a
chose qui
to one
marchait
more
mieux.
automatic.
En enlevant
But not the tools, not really yet, I think.
How does someone install a plugin on Windows?
In a way, they can.
They wanted to pre-compile it from that.
They contact the author and.
For this effect has been done many times. So
Yeah, because Enrico has the experience.
And we can use a package, but it's very difficult.
But they do exactly the same thing. They do a small distribution, integrating.
There's a special version that will include Coq.
So it's the same process as what we suggest, except that you get as many copies of Coq as
Mais
So ideally,
Ah, ok, c'est à casser la rage. C'est pas prêt. Je vais dire le toit, je vais dire l'écran est prêt.
Here you need to understand how to set up the same build environment, the same compiler, the same.
oh, that's what you did can be used. You install an official plugin.
Well,
Not
my
to install.
motivation to fix Cockpit 5 was so that it could work also in Symfony. And now I think it kind of works in Symfony, but I mean, the scripts are in the Cockpit.
We're getting late.
on a recommencé.
The scripts to set up the bit environment.
You can use my laptop si tu veux.
On est déjà en train d'essayer d'utiliser le mien.
Ouais, mais
Ça a marché.
2 hours and then you compile Cockpit 5.
ah, ok.
You
Vous voulez
plug in
ma-
and you make a package.
Le mien, c'est l'avantage que le laptop a. It's very old.
Je vais essayer d'envoyer les slides avec.
Yeah, but we can do it.
I don't know what Michael does, but it's
Something like this.
script plus plus, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
But you say it's costly because you have to recompile the code.
Tu me vois, j'ai mis le.
Virtual machine, you compile everything, stock, camel, label GTK, whatever. And then sometimes
C'est ça le
it's
cas?
place,
Non, c'est ça que
I'm not expert.
j'ai pas d'internet.
But technically, it's just
J'ai déjà donné un exposé, c'est pas bien tout ici.
But you're afraid that there's always a problem with this command, some surprise with some things which does not work correctly, and you don't have time to debug this. This is the problem.
Yeah, nobody is developing things on Windows, so these problems are found out the day when you
sur le bouton.
So you see that in the make file, you missed a quote, so there's a space in the path, and things would work. If there was someone really developing on Windows, these things would be stopped.
Il y a un autre truc là en dessous, c'est. Sinon, je vais envoyer aussi à Emilio.
So right as the general rule, I see we have
Did
nothing
you
to
receive
lose
my
to have
emails?
more connection with
Check
the
the
plugin
details.
themselves. We already have.
J'ai changed 2010.
Là, c'est quoi?
c'est pas le problème, pourquoi ça. Alors,
Je sais pas, ça a arrêté de marcher.
Alors, ça a marché.
Ouais.
Mais je peux changer. Enfin, faut switcher le câble ou le ClickShare.
Oui, ça
J'ai
vient.
switché là-bas. Là, on est sur le. Mais le signal n'a pas l'air d'arriver.
Ah, mais attends, t'as branché les deux là?
Bon, sinon, on teste sur les
Oui,
d'Emilio.
Et câble? Non, mais dis, tu cherches des envies. Ah, bah c'était sur le câble, regarde.
One
Ça
click,
marquait
one.
déconnecté. Ah, c'est pas switché sur le.
Ou on peut pas mal, tu vois, c'est le même truc que le plugin en Windows. La théorie.
Non, mais vous aurez toujours des problèmes que Coq ne s'installe pas si vous voulez passer un temps de.
Ah, connecté.
Ah,
Ça marche.
super.
Tant pis pour le.
So that's 10 minutes talk?
Oh shit, je me
Anyways, the slides are not even polished, so I think it makes more sense to do it now than doing it this afternoon. So I was coming with this.
Je voulais enlever la cartouche, mais c'est
Non, mais c'est bon. Ça. Okay. I was coming with this presentation about the way we distribute package today. So it's more general than just plugins, but it's very linked to what Emilio already talked about. So the historical way of distributing packages was through contribs. And the principle of contribs. Okay, I can do it without slides.
Just unplug and replug.
So why don't you use my laptop? I mean,
No, but what was the problem?
I don't know. The systems keep
Yes,
doing things and.
Connect it, it's okay. This is for as you say, for 3 slides, for your slides, it's okay.
Yeah, but I changed the configuration of the system, so
you changed
I
it?
don't know what I broke.
Just see.
You want the cable?
Yeah, maybe it doesn't work.
You don't touch
It seems that it works.
It works.
Okay, let's not touch anything now. Okay, so the first historical way of distributing package was through contribs. The principle of contribs was that users could develop their stuff, libraries, plugins, and then if they wanted to share them with and some other users, they would submit it to the code development team. And then the code development team would redistribute them and maintain them.
One question here, but why do you call this a distribution? Because it was not really distributed in the sense.
It used to be distribution.
Used to be. So you don't know the code and you got code contribute
We
to?
should ask you, but.
Yeah, no.
No, I'm not talking about that, but this was a central repository.
No, but even there was I think there was an archive with.
Yeah. It was not distributed, okay.
But
It was not shipped with.
Okay.
What do you mean?
It was not shipped with code.
It was not shipped with code, but I'm talking about.
So when the code release happened, I think at some point there used to be two archives, one containing code and one containing the set of code contribs.
Exactly.
Coming with that version. It was
Yeah.
distributed. You're not lucky.
We need to go.
On laisse le stream, c'est rigolo.
Are you serious? We can work in this country. This is.
C'est toujours en train de streamer.
Tout le monde a pu assister à l'incendie en direct.
Le voir partout des supérieurs à 7, c'était un peu inutile.
Et alors?
Et je pourrais faire qu'on pourrait faire ça aussi. On va faire que en dehors du noyau, je sais quoi que j'introduis un univers, je mets un supérieur ou un supérieur égal à 7 pour les contraintes.
Oui, parce que ça, c'est. Enfin, si c'est pas pour la salle 9, ça peut pas grand-chose à faire dans le noyau, à mon avis.
Mais ouais, ma crainte c'était juste d'avoir. Je sais quoi que t'introduis un univers. Alors on le fait dans le graphe.
Non, mais le problème du strict. Parce que de toute façon, tu l'as déjà.
On se retrouve avec des. Être juste utilisé
super
comme objet élémentaire.
Ah, le café, c'était en bas. Mais ça, c'est le double vie, c'est la représentation d'une trace. Parce que j'ai rien. Mon problème, c'est pas ça. Mon problème, c'est que c'est pourquoi le noyau fait un choix sur une société strictement de trace. Parce que c'est pas lui de décider ça. En fait. C'est pas nécessaire à la salle.
C'est en dehors. C'est
Avec
le noyau qu'on utilise.
Ah oui, mais non, parce que tu synthétises des contraintes. Quand tu prends l'ensemble des contraintes, tu les rajoutes dans l'environnement et là tu décides.
Moi,
oui, c'est ça. Ouais, mais. Oui.
Pour taguer les univers dans les contextes en disant STD va être le même.
Un truc comme ça.
Et avec contexte. Non, parce que les contextes, on les crée dans
De toute façon, je suis en train de virer ce code-là. Je suis en train de forcer les utilisateurs univers polymorphes à faire la complication.
À faire le contexte.
À faire le à passer à un même contexte.
Ouais. Parce que là, au moment où tu fais le contexte, tu rajoutes plus avec Axel.
Mais la façon dont c'est parce que l'amour de Jean-Claude c'est pour revenir à des listes de.
Suspense, est-ce que mon patch
mobile, tu veux reprendre?
Ouais, je veux bien, mais après, comme vous voulez.
Désolé.
J'aime bien, j'ai travaillé pour que t'étais pas là. Quoi?
On a travaillé sur le truc.
Regarde.
Estaba todo preparado para el paso, Enrique.
C'est un truc qui touche au noyau. Ça force l'utilisateur à mettre des fonctions.
Is done? Has been complete?
J'utilise pas ça.
Avec les Isabelle dit parce qu'ils avaient tout fait ensemble.
J'ai écrit pour vérifier.
C'est près de Théo.
Parce que moi,
Il est, pardon, Dino, il est l'acteur. C'est quand même plus important.
Tu peux laisser brûler tous tes souvenirs comme ça.
On va avoir la même à chaque fois.
Sur une deuxième arme, il y avait l'arme.
Qu'est-ce qui s'est passé? Ah oui, t'as débranché ton ordinateur?
Oui. Quelle erreur! Quelle erreur!
Ça va bien faire pour les gens qui suivent le streaming. Ils vont s'inquiéter pour la santé du développement coq. Ouh là là, tous les développeurs coq auront été enfumés. Ça fait longtemps qu'on a été enfumés.
C'est le mauvais clim. Il a disparu. Zut alors, moi qui ai besoin de lui pour un GDPR.
À quelle heure fait le marinage? À quelle heure?
T'as peur de quoi?
Je comprends pas.
So there is a clear sign that this.
Gods have decided.
Je vais pas merder ma terre pour le travail.
Il est quelle heure là? Parce qu'il faut qu'on prenne une décision.
On lit dans les entrailles des volatiles.
C'est pas con ça. Il est jours de mytho. Théorie. Je prédis un avenir sombre pour Eltac. Oui, on peut. Mais si on a le temps cet après-midi, parce que si on a constaté. Hein? Oui, on peut remettre sur cet après-midi. Ouais, attends, tu peux me montrer le programme juste.
Vraiment, là, c'est l'heure de tout prévu pour mon exposé.
Ton exposé, toi, maintenant? Ouais. Can we put your talk back to the afternoon?
Yes.
I'm sorry about that.
But I'm not even sure that we are going to have any talk.
Ouais. Arthur, ça te va de.
Why not? Why not? We should, right?
Yeah.
Ah, you mean because of the computer?
Let's try to have Arthur talk, but you're back in your. I'm not up for. I'm not up for. Oh, I trust Arthur. Sure.
On vient d'enlever les clés d'évacuation.
Et tout est ton interpréteur.
Fire
En fait, au lieu de faire toutes ces complications tout à l'heure, je vais juste te demander ton adaptateur puisqu'on a le même PC.
C'est l'exemple.
C'est pas pour ça que ça va marcher.
Donc là, j'ai mis étape 2 ou étape 3.
Ouais, très beau jeté.
Est-ce que je comprends pas? C'est comme un secret, ils font ça.
Ah non, c'est un exercice.
Ah non, non.
Un joli fond d'écran en plus.
Moi, je le fais sur mon ordinateur.
So it works.
Incredible.
Yeah. There are talks which work and talks which don't.
Yeah, it's specifically against me.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, so the goal of this talk was to give a little tour of TLC, which is a library that I use to do all my proofs.
The Learning Channel?
Sorry?
TLC is for the Learning Channel?
I will explain what TLC stands for. So it's a new release of TLC 2.0. I spent the summer re-engineering everything and cleaning up all definitions. So in TLC, you have tactics and library. I will not focus on tactics at all, talk only about the library. So TLC stands for type class based library for Coq and not something else. And the main feature is that it's while exploiting type classes, obviously, and it's based on classical logic. So for a long time, I was asked, why do I not do like Isabelle proofs or all proofs? But it's an attempt to see what can be done in Coq using classical logic. And I use this library mainly for program verification and meta-theory proofs. The first version of TLC was in 2010 at the end of my thesis, and it was coming just after the introduction of type classes in Coq. So just in terms of size, it's like 35,000 lines of code. I try to keep that as like short as possible so that I can cope with the definitions. So as you can see, there are like many definitions and tactics compared with a number of lines. So proofs are typically short in this library. And so what does it cover? So there are some tactics. There is some logical setup with the axioms. I will show that in a minute. Some basic stuff about Boolean and reflection. Things about relations, epsilon, some basic structure order, well-foundedness, and some classic data structures like sums and lists. This is the biggest part, lists. And I will present what I'm doing with type classes for representing containers, like set, subset, maps, and so on. Don't hesitate to ask questions if you want. So let's get started with the kind of logical foundations of C. From which you can derive all other classical axioms. So extensional, functional extensionality in its dependent version. We have propositional extensionality and indefinite description, which gives you epsilon essentially. So I reproduced the results that were in the standard Coq library, showing that from these you can derive everything else. Extensionality concretely means that when I'm going to state an equality between two functions, I will directly go for the simplest form. And for propositions, it means that I will essentially never use if and only if in statements. I will use equal directly when I can. Makes the definitions more concise and the rewriting a bit easier. And also this extensionality is very critical for deriving the set library, like in the standard set module.
Ensemble?
Ensemble, yes. Ensemble.
So that you're one user of Ensemble, kind of.
Yes, kind of.
Ensemble?
Ensemble. So in this setting, in this classical setting, bool and prop are almost the same. So you can define ifs and else on propositions. And there is this is true constructor for taking any proposition and doing it as a Boolean. I use this one especially in specifications. So this is an example of a separation logic specification where I want to express that the result of a function is a Boolean that is true if and only if some proposition is true. For example, if and only if the list is nil. And having it written in that form is an equality makes it easy to substitute the result B in the reasoning about the rest of the code. So this presentation is well suited for reasoning in the separation logic using this is true here. Like in SSReflect, I also have the other direction, the correction is true with a lowercase true, to take any Boolean and view it as a proposition. So that again is useful in verification. If you have in your camel code, if B1 n not B2, for example, you can do the case analysis to reason about both branches, and you get in the first branch an assumption B1 n not B2, which is the same as in the code. That's important for keeping track of things in the verification process. But then you have a rewriting tactic that you can use to normalize this to push everything into prop as much as possible. So in summary, I'm using a mix of, depending on the cases, of this is true to go from prop to bool and sometimes to go from bool to prop. And I find that both were useful. Inhabited types, that's the last part of the logical foundation. So this class inhab is used to quantify over inhabited types. It's used to define the arbitrary, similar to what is done in Isabelle. So you can write arbitrary anywhere you like to produce a value of the type of some inhabited type. So if you have an instance for nat, for example, you can check that arbitrary is type nat. Or there's an instance for list, you can write arbitrary for a list. And so inhabited types are used, for example, if you want to say that something should not be specified. So it's not completely opaque in Coq for some, because you still have convertibility, but The intention is that you cannot do unfold arbitrary if you're in a proof. So for example, combine of list of different size, you want the results in the undefined case to be arbitrary. So it's a way to trace what should not be overspecified. Arbitrary is also used inhabited types is also useful for whenever you call epsilon, because you need to know that the result type is inhabited. And in particular, I use it for my fixed point definition, so we'll talk about that later on. You can take the fixed point of any functional, provided the result type is inhabited. Right?
Is epsilon defined using arbitrary, or they are two different?
Epsilon takes as argument inab A, like min.
Yeah, but you could take the arbitrary element of the subset type of the sigma type.
If you want to call epsilon on predicate P, and P has type A to prop, you need to know that A is inhabited.
But P.
Not P. You want to see the type of epsilon?
No, it's okay.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Just one question.
Wait.
Does inhab occur often enough to justify mangling the noun?
You want inhabited in full? Yeah, inhab is. I can count occurrences. It's suddenly in the hundreds at least.
But it's unrelated to occurrences because you have completion.
That's the neat thing.
The problem is when you quantify about 3 inhabited types, and you would like in natural language to say inhabited ABC, and there is no support for that in Coq. If there were support for that, I will agree with you that you could go for inhabited.
You can make it work.
Inhabited ABC with automatically having instances for ABC viewed as separate in Coq. I don't know.
Couldn't you write inhabited A star D star C?
But then you would add some noise in the projections in the proofs.
And
if the triple is inhabited,
it's equivalent, but your proof will have to play some additional projections on the fly.
But, which would be convertible.
Yeah, and the type class in France.
It's a valid suggestion. I went for something small here.
You need projections, but you will also, when applying a lemma which is inhabited A cross B, and if you have inhabited A and inhabited B, you need the other direction, and with step classes, that means you have a loop.
You will pay for some lookup.
Sure.
Okay.
And also about inhabited, there is an inhabited type already in the standard.
Yes, I should have said, so TLC is independent as much as possible from the standard library. So I only reuse the type string and list because some things are hardwired like equal because they are hardwired by syntactics. But everything that is not hardwired in syntactics, I redefine it in TLC. And that's how my development has been stable for the past 10 years without any breaking.
I hope this is not controversial, but so why this design choice? Because the standard library has been fairly stable as well.
Has been?
Fairly stable as well.
Not like things about numbers, for example.
So it was a stability concern.
It's not only about stability, it's about naming conventions. I will talk a lot about naming convention at the end of the talk. I like the names to be like easy to guess. So, I mean, all these arguments have been made by SSReflect before me, so I'm not trying to develop on this. But the point is to be as little dependent as possible on the standard library. So it was only when I was forced to that I would depend on it. Okay, so next part is.
For the inhabited question, you could have a notation for fun inhabited ABC standing for.
Or for all inhabited. For all inhabited.
It's a notation for a context.
You could probably.
You don't want that it's a product. You want it expanded as a context. If you have inhabited ABC,
yes,
you want that it distributes 3 times inhabited.
Yeah, maybe with a notation you could do that.
because now we have irrefutable pattern matching somewhere in there, right? Is this what you're talking about?
No notation. No notation.
We're talking about notation to factorize inhabited.
Because he doesn't want to compare to build this as a count.
Yeah, but you could also destructure it on the fly with this new syntax that they have in does that.
So there is this notation where you can say parentheses x and y of type t. Maybe we need something similar to say such type and such type satisfying such type class or something like this.
No, what I was saying is that we have a syntax where you could say, let's say, you do a pattern matching in there. So you say pair xy of type inhabited A type B. Then you don't want to write all that.
Yeah, yeah.
But that's the structuring for you. So your proof will begin with a match of this
product
and obtain the instances on the group.
Okay, we can discuss.
No, it's just a random idea.
Okay. So computing in TLC. So essentially, I try to avoid simple as much as possible because simple is not very well specified. It's hard to control. There's too much unfolding, sometimes not enough. And also, it's not very nice interacting with abstractions. If you have a function that comes from a functor and you want it to be it's coming as an abstract predicate, so then simple doesn't work on it. And therefore, for uniformity, it's better to express everything using rewriting lemmas. So in TLC, I use almost rewriting for doing everything, and I use auto rewrites on sets of lemmas that are confluent and normalizing, so that everything is well specified how it behaves. So it does not depend on the order of rewriting as much as possible. And I have these tactics scattered through the library. For example, for list, I have rev list. It's normalizing a list expressions. For example, with associativity, removing nils, and so on. So currently, I have rev list, I have rev int, I have rev blah, 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 and so on. Ideally, I would like a single rev tactic that can take as argument the databases. And hence my question on the conclusion. Nevertheless, there's some extra arguments of sometimes it's more complicated. Sometimes you need extra argument for being able to compute. For example, you need a comparison relation. And also, if you want to compute with partial recursive functions with non-trivial domains, you have to play with you have to give the measure that decreases. And this can add like some proof terms in the computation. I'm not sure exactly what happens when you type simple, but often it doesn't do like efficiency expect. So for all these reasons, I think that it's kind of unavoidable to have clean logical definitions on the one hand, and separately code that computes and have some equivalence between the two. So this is something that is not currently inside of TLC, but I have experimented in several projects. So for example, you have a definition of having an element in a list that will go in prop. And then you have an executable version that computes a Boolean and that takes a comparison function for the elements as argument. And then a proof of equivalence. So sometimes it's convenient to have one direction, sometimes the other. One, like each direction is an immediate corollary from the other, but you want to prove one of the two, depending on what is most convenient. And then you can go from one version to the other. So I've been experimenting with that by hand. Sometimes it's useful it would be useful to have some support for automatically generating parts of the definitions. When you're using some functions that have a straightforward computable equivalent, you will want Coq to generate the corresponding version and do all the substitutions for you. So that's like a plan. For now, I'm happy to do things by hand. But yeah, still it's a bit of work. But I think that this scheme where you have fine control over what extra arguments are being used in the computable versions, I think it's the right way to go for this. Like trying to do both efficient versions and like logical definitions at the same time, I think it's doomed to fail. But it's personal.
What
Any
about
question?
partial computation?
We'll speak about, you mean partial recursive functions?
No.
Or
Yeah, it's a bit like that. Yeah, if you have a propositional a proposition that you can prove automatically, but only in certain cases.
Mhm.
Do you feel a need for this kind of step? Something that with through computation give a proof if it works and fail otherwise?
Yeah, that's. So we will see a bit, some aspect of that later when we discuss fixed point. But also, just in some cases, yeah, you can have a function that returns an option. If it's true, then well, if it's something, then you know it's a valid proof. Otherwise, you know nothing. I have also this kind of thing.
Okay.
I have examples that we can discuss these examples. So overloading. So this is a main feature of TLC. So I use type classes to implement overloading for container operators, comparison operators, and properties of all these operators. And I do not currently use it for arithmetic operators because there are too many occurrences and it will blow up in terms of efficiency. But ideally, I would like to do that too. So, yep. I will explain the details.
How about the efficiency problem?
No, the efficiency problem is because if you have an arithmetic expression with 50 pluses and minus, and you need to resolve a type class for each.
Yeah, that's a lookup.
Yes, it's a lookup, but I've seen in practice that when you try to do some rewriting on these things, it just blows up.
But it sounds like a bug.
No, it's just not been designed for it, I think. You need some caching mechanism, and to make the caching works, my understanding is you need to relax a bit the semantics that is currently given, so that you allow yourself to not like recheck things if the context has changed a little bit.
But caching, I'm still just a lookup. You have one. I guess you have one instance carrying.
You need to do it preemptively. As soon as it looks like you're looking for a plus on that, you say, "Oh, I already have a plus on that. Let's try to use the same." Even if the context changes a little bit, something like this.
Even if the context introduces some new instances, or you will alternatively you will need some way to detect that the context introduces new instances that could match, because the current specification says you should like apply IOTO, which is going to pick the last introduced instance. So it's not been designed. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm just saying that it will require some serious work to make that work efficiently.
But the rewriting might be a bug.
I think it was just looking for too many places to do the rewriting and trying to resolve too many instances on the way. Okay, so here is an example using containers. So in the lib container file, you have a definition for each of the operators that are typical for containers. We will look at, for example, in for membership and intersection. And for each, I have a notation. So I try to stay as close as possible from the standard mathematical notations. For example, bracket is for reading in the map. This N is for intersection.
Close to the usual mathematics.
It looks like it, right?
Also an adept of the backslash.
Backslash to avoid conflicts in parsing. I use backslash for all my notations.
And if anybody else uses backslash,
then it gets slashed, right? So for example, using this overloading, I can write the same statement that will work both for lists or for maps. Say that on the map at some key to set a value. If you read at the same key, you get the value that you wrote. If you read at a different key, you get the old value. Now, because you can state the same lemmas on different containers, you can actually state these lemmas once and for all. So here's another example of the statement that membership in intersection is a conjunction of memberships. That is stated once and for all containers that have a membership and intersection. And then I have many variants of this lemma that are useful to work with in practice, that are also coming as type classes, and that can be derived from that one. I'll show that on the next slide. So just to see what kind of variants are useful, you have the introduction lemma, you have the invariant lemma, you have the state for the negation of membership, and right and left introduction for negation, and inversion lemma for negation.
Why is it useful to make each of those a class as opposed to a package of those? Do you have structures that's at least only some of them?
Let me show you how I use it in practice, and perhaps it will answer your question. So in practice, so I showed that there are some that the variants are derivable from the main results. So from inter, you can derive not in inter, for example, not in inter, you can derive inversion. And then I give for each concrete container an instance. So for example, for the set container, I have an instance of the intersection and Q lemma. And as soon as I have this instance, I get all the other ones. So for example, on a goal that has an hypothesis H not in E and F, I can do directly apply not in, so the lemma about negation of membership, the inversion lemma for it, directly on H. And on the fly, Coq will figure out that this lemma is derivable because from this instance, and for that set type that is involved here, and it's going to do the right thing, that is, I can meet the two hypotheses in two cases. So by having one classes for each lemma, I have access to the to the projection. And now your question is, why do I not package them? For this particular example, it could be useful to package. I will show you that for the order relationships lemmas, you want to have fine-grained control about which lemmas are available depending on whether your order is total or not total, and so on.
Why do you need a class actually? Why don't you
Class?
just get? I mean, in that case, why don't you just have a definition that is parameterized by
a lemma who has an argument, who takes the main class as an argument.
Yeah.
Why don't you do
And you
that?
apply the lemma, it will resolve.
Because that, yeah.
Maybe this example gives you some false impression.
So
I have a couple hundred lemmas like this one, and depending on the container, some lemmas are true and some lemmas are not true, depending on the containers. Because you don't have always all the instances.
This is a different question. Why is inter class?
This one?
Yes.
Why not?
You could have some system or containers, presumably, that satisfy this lemma, but not this one, not the other one. So you want to be able to give instances for that particular lemma. So I don't presume things about containers. I know that each container will satisfy a subset of the properties, and maybe not all. It's likely that for all containers that you will use in practice, if you satisfy one property, you satisfy the other. But there are things that are not true. For example, for cardinals, the cardinal of the intersection or the union is equal to different things depending on the container. And so for each container, you want to be able to. So very pragmatically, I had the choice between trying to package things in a clever way or just do one class for each. And when I do one class for each, I don't have to think about how to package things and if it's going to be broken by some or such container.
But a lot of math theory is about trying to figure out what the right abstractions in terms of packaging.
Right, and practice shows that you're always looking like some knife theory, but you also have this lemma and maybe just not that one and so on. So in practice, I just found that this was like not hardwiring anything, and it worked. So now maybe there is some efficiency issue by having so many classes, but I didn't see them, and I don't see why there should be.
I think this is important information. By doing so, you haven't run into a wall.
Yeah, sorry.
You haven't run into a wall of complexity.
Yeah, so far no. I mean, having classes, they get. I mean, it's just a lot of top-level definitions.
Yeah, but when you get to having instances of those, then you could have bad interactions. Could be. So I think that's what.
So the paths are simple. Like all the resolution paths have depths 2 or 3.
Yeah, but you just said that overloading wasn't so simple.
The overloading is done here.
You don't apply 50 lemmas at once. There's a difference. Writing an expression with 50 classes.
Yeah. You apply these lemmas one by one.
Classes, is it too overload the operators, and they often
Yeah, that's why I was
problems of like parsing and type checking, but rewrite, yes.
Mhm.
So it seems here that the search in the next line where you have this class implies the class, I think the search, you design it so that it is deterministic.
Yes, so now this is another question I wanted to raise. Sometimes, especially for the order lemmas about comparisons, you can have ambiguous paths because you can be an order because you're a projection of a total order, or you can be an order because you're a projection of some other property. And you have ambiguous paths, but the point is that it does not matter, and I should not get warnings for those, because all my classes, they are in prop. So by proof irrelevance, it doesn't matter which path gives me the lemma. I just want to know that there exists a proof.
If the system had proof irrelevance.
So with proof irrelevance, the ambiguous path should not be an issue. And with some proper caching, it should be happy stopping at the first one.
Yeah, so the problem is if one of the things I ran into was that when you start having multiple paths all over the place, if you ever make a mistake, the answer of the system is go in an infinite loop.
I'm well aware of that.
But you're probably good enough to never make mistakes.
It's just the scale at which I've been working makes it easy to not make these mistakes, but it's.
Just a naive question about this. Do you have other lemmas and in to apply here, or it's mainly the only one that you can apply?
Like,
could it be generated also, this one? Could you do destruct edge just on that nothing in is generated?
Are you on destruct H?
Do you have a simplification procedure for this Latin?
Oh yes, I have like rev list I showed earlier. I have the rev set, and rev set as a database with in inter-q and not in inter-q in it, and it will normalize set expressions by pushing. So I could do rev set in H, then destruct H, and that will do the same. So it's convenient to have both. It's convenient to have normalization tactics and to have direct access to the inversion lemmas when you need them in the form you need them. So both are useful.
What do you call normalization tactics?
Normalization tactic is it's auto rewrite with a base that contains this lemma and that lemma.
You're a happy user of auto rewrites.
I'm a happy user of auto rewrite to the limitation that I can't define a tactic that selects the goals. But like I said earlier, I use auto rewrite a lot.
And that works.
I have some efficiency issues. For example, when I place 200 lemmas about lists in one database, it's noticeably slower than when I have only 50. Noticeably mean I can just measure the time that it takes. And currently I have two versions. I have the rewrite most useful list lemmas, and I have the full version. I would like to avoid this if possible.
What do you have in mind when you ask this? Is it that you should be using rewrite strat?
Yeah,
I have tried rewrite strat. It was like 50 times slower. So
no report then?
I didn't have time to investigate.
I'm rather concerned by the soundness of auto rewrite and the fact that it actually is not generating something. Soundness, like it's a completely buggy code.
No, but if the proof is checked,
yeah, the proof is checked. I mean, not the soundness of the kernel, like the fact that the tactic is buggy and can not find paths when it can or things like that.
Didn't have the problem.
Okay.
Okay. So let me continue with construction of sets and finite sets in TLC. So this is similar to the ensemble library. I'm just going to show what is specific to type classes. So a set is a predicate. You can have implementation of in and union as operation on predicates. And then on top of that, you can provide instances for membership and for union operation, like I showed before. And as soon as I have provided the instances and prove a couple lemmas about them, I make everything opaque so that simple will never unfold these definitions here.
So when I do proofs, I never get to see the actual implementation. Everything is being done in terms of the lemmas. I apply this, one interesting aspect of the set library is this reduce operator. So you can reduce a cumulative monoid over the elements of the set. So monoid is a pair of the operators. And then I have a monoid class that packages the properties required of this operator and natural element. And the fold induction lemma, and I have some. So this is the induction principle. And the interesting result is fold union. It says that fold union is a composition of the fold on the two elements of the union. And that works on a finite set for disjoint finite sets in a commutative monoid. So this is a kind of example that can be stated with fold and union being type classes operations.
Why don't you use projections?
Projections where? Here?
Yeah.
I could. I think that's it's coming from an old version. I wanted to show you this because I wanted to know if the let could be taken outside. That would be what I really want, to take the let outside.
The definition of the class, I mean, like we...
To factorize the let over the lines.
And why
Sorry?
Why doesn't it work? Like that?
When I tried several years ago, it didn't work.
But what does didn't work mean?
Like you will want to take what the let here, let m.
You cannot because it's a better matching.
No, it could be just minus.
Good.
No, I was no, it doesn't work.
Okay, so
wait,
but
we can add inductive types.
Instead of packing monoid up, they have the two operations kept separate in type classes. So why do it this way?
You mean monoid opera and monoid neutral kept separate?
Yes.
And that's for overloading. Because their operations carry notation type classes.
Yeah. So I think it's important that you can apply fold over a monoid that is not necessarily a type class, and this is very important. And I've seen some design where you're forced to apply reduction over a monoid that is presented as a type class, and in many cases this was not what I wanted.
You want to be
property of the operator.
I want to be explicit, and sometimes on top of that, you can have a layer where you have a particular, like a monoid that is presented as a type class, for example, if it's plus, and then you can have a fold plus as a fold plus union. So in a few specific cases, it's useful to have, on top of those results, specialized results using type classes, but the general useful form that I found to be useful is this one. Yeah, just a few words about cardinal. So cardinal is defined on sets, and it gives an arbitrary result if a set is not finite. And so, for example, you have lemmas, cardinal of union is less than a cardinal, the sum of the cardinals for finite sets. And independently of that, there is a finite set module. So a finite set module is packaging a set and a proof of its finiteness. And this is the only place where I use dependently typed programming in TLC. And I do it, I reduce it to the bare minimum by only using a sum type and stating explicit lemmas that are telling what needs to be said. So for example, the union of two finite sets is a finite set. So I state that as a lemma. And then I can build the implementation of the union of finite sets by taking the, essentially the proof here and packaging it with the union of U of E, sorry, union of E and F, and that's giving me the package. So this file is only packaging the fact that finiteness composes well, and so that you have the set and the finiteness proof. package together in this fset type.
Or do you use a definition and not a bespoke inductive?
Definition and not inductive.
Why reuse SIG if you're not being generic?
I could use inductive here. That's true. It's equivalent, right? It's just a matter of presentation.
Yeah, well, you're just giving a little more rope for cock to hang itself.
Yeah, okay. No, it could be an inductive here. That's true. Now I have a question that I haven't resolved yet. Do we want an implicit coercion from f set to set so that you can provide a finite set wherever a set is expected? You think that it could be useful to have this coercion so that you don't have to write the conversion explicitly. But having this coercion has some trouble, cause you some trouble, because then when you write x in E, you don't know if it's x in the set obtained from the finite set E, or if it's the in operator directly on finite sets as defined here.
Did you just discover object orientation?
Object orientation. You mean
like the class L?
Right. So my take so far is I will tend to go without the coercion to avoid these unresolvable ambiguities.
Use a trick. We have both canonical structure-based overloading and coercion-based overloading for containers in comp.
So concretely, what does this mean?
You can have both.
And how do you deambiguate syntactically, or which one is the default when you write x in E and E is a finite set?
If it can be resolved by canonical structure, then that's going to work. Otherwise, it goes and tries a coercion.
So the default will go for x
and
in finite set
convertible,
E
of course.
directly.
And the operator is defined with two tiers, so that rewrite will work even when you give one. If you give one form instead of the other, they'll both print the same, and one is convertible to the other, and one matches the other. So it's
okay. So I have one bullet point.
Smoke and mirrors.
I have one bullet point later to precisely ask this question: what from the SS Reflect experience can be ported to type classes in terms of resolving ambiguities like this?
You may need to go through using canonical structure, because the thing that works, that makes this work, is to use the structure projection as a portion class.
Okay. I was trying to do everything without canonical structure, so, but perhaps there's no other way. I don't know.
Is there a reason for that?
For that? Yeah. I don't understand. I think to understand the detail of canonical structure and to teach that, it makes the bar of entry too high for you.
No, I meant in terms of the complexity, if you really want the full details of the resolution strategy and things like that.
Canonical structures is much more linked to unification. You need to understand the enfolding, the unification, and so on. So
Depends on
which
classes you define. Right? So if you start playing dirty tricks, it can get very involved. On the other hand, you can do pretty nasty stuff with type classes as well. So.
Can a type class resolution depend on the canonical structure resolution?
They can mix
that. That used not to work, but that's been ironed over.
There's an interesting bug about that somewhere in the bug tracker.
Yeah.
So anyway, so my take is to try to do everything with type classes and ask for extensions of this mechanism if I find some. This question here of ambiguity, I mean, it's going to be an important question to experiment.
In particular case, it's SIG, so the coercion mechanism of program will resolve this. If it needs to coerce your F set to a set.
Yeah, so maybe I need to use an inductive to deactivate that. Yeah. Okay. All right, so applying similar ideas to comparison operators, less than, greater than, and strict versions, they come in distinct type classes. You could argue that they could be packed into one, but I applied my naive strategy, which didn't work for containers, to have one class for each property. Maybe you have, for example, a relation at hand that you want to write strictly less than, but doesn't have the other versions, or you want some different meaning maybe for the other versions.
But you do have two different relations. It's not symmetric.
Be better to package this four into one class. I might listen to you. So the point of this, presentation is that you can provide LE and derive the others, but you can also come a priori with only the strict version and derive the other version.
Yeah.
It's not always the case that you have LE to start with. Sometimes you have LT to start with.
But my question was,
that's how we do it. So we have both for exactly that reason.
Yeah.
And then an action in the class that tells you that
you can convert.
Yeah, but my question was not so much about LE versus LT, LE versus G.
Yeah, I mean,
LE versus G, do you factorize? I could factorize LE and G.
but how do you state a lemma involving several operators? This is what I'm not understanding here. If they are not related a priori, how can you develop a theory where a lemma involves several operators?
In practice, they will be related in your statement.
Yeah, in practice, you only they're always related. The question is, which one do you provide first?
Also, you can only prove them if they are derived, but yet you cannot state like in this. You cannot state like a generic lemma now, right?
So I'm going to show you on the next slide.
Okay.
So I have properties about order and total order relation that are not taking a type class, that are taking a relation in general. So I have generic lemmas about relations in one file. And then I have specific instances of these properties, order and total order, for the type class LE. And I have found that it's very important to have these two-layer thing, because sometimes you want to use results about a number of order relations that are not like defined using type classes. Now that you have things like this, you can have some instances. So projections are useful if you have a total order, then you have an order. It's also useful to go in the other direction. If you have an order and a property that it's total, then you have the total order. But if you put all possible lemmas, then you have cycles, and search is too expensive. So that's currently an issue. So in the current version, I make sure that there are no like cycles in the system. But sometimes you will. It seems like it would be useful to have the cycles.
Yeah. And so you have a cut functionality that allows you to specify passes you don't want to cut from the search.
Okay.
That might be.
I'd like ideally to have a proper DFS mechanism with the caching. So whatever cycle I put, it's just going to do the right thing. I don't know if it's possible.
No, but the cycle is different from caching. You could use a cat to say if I come to the same goal, more or less.
Yeah.
I stop.
Well, to prevent going into the cycle, but depending on which side you start your search from, you can reach all possible lemmas. Okay, and then in practice, what's also useful to have, so here maybe my slide is not perfect because I have only examples for total order relation, but I have a number of properties that are useful. Some depend only on the order property, some depend on the total order property. And so I have one class for each statement that I find useful to use. And then I have instances to show that, for example, you can get that lemma if you have total order, or that lemma if you have only order. This makes a minimal requirement for each result. So in practice, I can rewrite, for example, NLE, EQGT, this one. I can rewrite it using this name, and it's going to work for NAT, for int, for any type I like.
Yeah, but so where is the greater than operator coming from there?
It's coming from the instance here and the derived version from LE.
I see. So yes, if I provide like I see.
So if you provided LT and you derived LE, it will still be connected in the right way. It will evaluate to. It will be convertible with what you actually expect.
but in the case where I'm a bit lost because so imagine, is there a setting where you have another strictly greater than the derived one?
If you provide first the strict operator and then you derive that.
I mean, in practice, do you have instances where greater than is not derived from?
No, I agree with you that greater than could be packaged with less than, and similarly for the strict version. They could be packaged pairwise.
My feeling is that if it's always the derived one, then you just did something that's I don't see the point. And if it's not the same, then you're going to run into trouble when you have the same notation for that could infer the derived version or pick the other one. They're not the same.
So
don't you have
I don't.
with two orders on the same time?
Yeah.
If I have two orders on the same time, I'm going to go explicit. I'm not going to use type classes. Type classes only make sense when you have a canonical order on your type. So one motivation that I want to stress on is that I find that these lemmas, for example, this kind of lemma, it should be only stated once in the library. Currently, if you look in the standard code library, currently, like statement of this form, you find one in int, one in nat, one in q, and one in real. And having a factorized statement for these lemmas, because there are hundreds of them, it's very important. Okay, if I have just a bit more time, I would like to describe the naming conventions that are in place in TLC. So I will cover various things. It's not very well ordered, but you'll get the ideas. So for constructors, my convention is to reuse the name of the inductive as prefix. When there is a single constructor, it's going to be the name intro. So this comes from Coq conventions. And if I have a single, and yeah, for type class constructors, I use this lowercase, uppercase strategy to say that there is a canonical class for each property that I state like this. And I use make for the constructors of records. So there is no debate here. It's just I'm just telling the convention that I chose. Okay, so introduction lemmas. If you conclude like for all of a cons, so all elements in the cons satisfy P, I will name this lemma for all cons. So I get the shortest possible combination of names for the introduction lemmas. And I always write things in the order that they appear. So transitive closure is transitive. I will write trans T closure in the way I read it. Appear. And there is one case where you don't write all the arguments is when they are necessarily constrained. For example, if you take the nth element at index 0 of a cons, or the nth element of S of n at a cons, it only makes sense to do the lookup on a non-empty list. So I drop the underscore cons at the end because it's constrained. So in some cases, I don't apply the standard protocol, I shorten it because it has to be this way.
In the first case, you could even give the statement of the lemma as a statement. As short or as longer.
Well, no, you have the R in addition, but it's not quite true. But even though it might look on this particular example, it's not true. So I use for conciseness the suffix L and R to distinguish between left and right versions. So here, this is an introduction lemma for T closure, transitive closure, when you make one step to the left or one step to the right. So you get short names for these things. Now, in general, if you have a lemma that is not necessarily an introduction lemma, the conclusion depends on the hypothesis. So I'm going to state the name of the conclusion, but off, and then describe the main premises. As you can derive RST closure from RS closure. This lemma, you can say that you can derive S closure is equal to itself in case you have a symmetric relation. So the general scheme is you use this off to separate between the conclusion and the premises, which are described in order. There are some cases where you don't apply this off. It's when the premises is just a side condition, which essentially constrain the value that you have here. So here's an example. You do the n's of some number that is positive. So what you really mean is that you call n's on some positive number, and the fact that you have n and n positive here is kind of an artifact presentation. So when you have several premises, you just concatenate them. So for example, ST closure of sim trans. I don't write the n separator because it makes the name too long, except when you can have ambiguities. So the problem is you can have ambiguities when you have predicates that are already concatenation of two things, like some function is commutative associative. If you have a definition like this, then you need the end to the ambiguity.
Couldn't you just use some kind of escape character, not to have this kind of?
Okay, so for interactions, so whenever I have a function that distributes over some constructor, for example, or some other function, I will describe the equality by saying map of cons, map of app, and so on, length of map, and I always write the name in the order of that things appear. Just makes it simple, and I'm not trying to recall like which one was defined first or something like this. Always in the way it appears. Sometimes the lemmas have premises that are not mentioned in the name because these premises are like canonically needed. So mem in a map, if you think about when is it the case that you belong to a map, well, the only hypothesis that makes sense is that you have one element that belongs to the list. So this premise is not described in the name of the lemma because it's obviously needed. Wait?
It's not strictly related to the name in Manado that I see so many levels. Why do you use the, like for example, in the first one, why do you put a for all F there and not F from the left of the code? Is it
left
the reason?
of the code? Oh yeah, I use this style.
Because you like it? I mean,
because I use it forever, and also there's a reason is that I think statement of specifications should be as easily readable as possible, and this like the
putting more quantifiers doesn't help.
No, sorry.
Argument.
Okay, we can discuss syntax over lunch, but
no, I thought maybe it was making your proof so that we don't see easier.
No, it is just a presentation that I've been using since the very first day I was taught Coq, and I never change it. I think I like having for all because it's saying what is. Okay, I have the counterexample, which I don't like, and that does not make sense when I explain or present results to people who don't know Coq so well. If you have an exist in your conclusion, so you say, for x exists y, such that something. Now, if you put the x in the name, you have lemma x, column, exist y, and it looks like your result is exist y for, in absolute, and it doesn't depend on x. Whereas if you have for x exist y, it makes it very clear this dependency. This is okay. It's arguable. It's equivalent. It doesn't matter.
What happens when X goes in the section context?
I have a slide about section context. I don't use section context, so you will see that in a minute.
So the only real difference makes is that you have this automatic introduction.
I have an introduction tactic to name my lemmas, so it doesn't cost me anything. I use my intro v tactic. I bind the name of the hypothesis, and I don't care for introducing the variables, so it doesn't buy me anything. The inversion lemmas, So in an inversion lemma is one where the first premise is the main one, and you want to apply some forward reasoning on this first premise. So for example, if you know that for all P applies to some cons, you want to deduce that applies to the head and to the rest of the list. So the convention here is for all cons, describing the first premise, inv as suffix. And you can add things after inv if you have specialized versions or there is not a canonical form. So for example, if you only care to get the head, you can have const inv head. So this is also useful to have, or inv tail. And sometimes you have different versions. For example, if you have mem in a list, you might say, okay, the element must be somewhere in the middle. So this is an inv middle lemma. Or maybe you're interested in getting the first occurrence in the list, so then you have inv middle first, which gives you the inv middle and some assumption that it doesn't occur in the left prefix. So in summary, the convention is use inv, and then if there are different forms, add some description of it. You also have inversion lemmas for function results. For example, if a map of some function gives you nil, then the list must be nil. So here you have the description of the premise, map aq nil. Let's keep over the other examples that are similar. Okay, so with functional equality, propositional extensionality, you can use equal in places that you would typically use if and only if in other settings. So this lemma says that for all is equivalent to the extensional version that says for all x that is in the list, p of x is true. So this is stated as an equality, and the name uses an infix aq to describe the fact that it's an equality. When the right-hand side is canonically determined from the left-hand side, you just stop after the aq. So not or is conjunction of negations. That gives you just not or aq, and you drop the rest, because it's obvious what you're going to get. So observe, just coming back a second, that the name without aq is the introduction form, the name with aq is the equality form, and the name with inv is the inversion form when you have this as assumption. And following this convention everywhere makes it like easy to guess names for the lemmas that you need when you need it. Okay, one challenge is the resolution of symmetric lemmas. The closure of the inverse is the inverse of the closure. Which way should you go for? In TLC, so the choice is determined by some notion of simplicity, which is somewhat arbitrary, but usually makes sense in mathematics. Which of the two definitions comes first? So in the theory of relations, I have defined inverse before transitive closure, because inverse is a simple notion. So inverse is a simpler notion, so when you want to normalize things to simpler forms, you will tend to take the simpler operators to the outside. So this direction is more useful to rewrite. So I'm going to go for the statement of this form. And in addition, this lemma is going to be in the section that talks about properties of T-closure and not in the section that talks about properties of inverse. So having its name starting with T-closure also like makes it fit well in its place.
But will you also define the second one?
No, only the first one. Okay, to finish, so because I use this off to make the connection between conclusion and premises, is used in some places, but it was necessary here. Okay, and just to conclude, section variables. I found it very important when coming back, like after months, to some definitions, to be able, for myself and for teaching especially, to have definitions, important definitions, be completely explicit in their arguments. So I followed this design presentation in TLC. I have a section that talks about the length of a list. It defines length with all its argument explicit, so that I can show this definition.
What is the asymptotic behavior of this claim?
I can show
The
you.
number of parameters approaches infinity. It's still true that it's.
If you have infinitely many parameters, you're doomed anyway.
Okay, that was the joke. But my question is, if you really get definitions with many parameters,
you should package
actually more readable. To...
For one, you should package them if you have too many, and for two, the complexity is not going away somehow. So if you want somebody to be able to read your definition and figure out what your specification that you give actually means by looking, oh, specification is mentioning length, like what is length? Goes read length. This is what your proof reviewer for your proof wants to read this verb.
But one thing which
if you're doing Galois theory, you probably want to have a little more things in the context because there's a whole bunch of things here that are going to happen in the same field extension.
Maybe
so it's,
maybe there is a way.
So it depends on what you're doing. If you're working with lists, I agree. I'd rather do that.
I think if you have many assumptions to pack somehow, and maybe Coq is lacking some support for doing the on-the-fly unpackaging in the places where you need to see the components individually. But yeah, I'd be happy to look at your specific case, like if you think that this strategy will not apply there. So beware that
all the things you're doing, it's sort of follow the same route.
So that might also be linked to your use of canonical structures. Here, the definitions only depends on some on the definition. It doesn't depend on the assumptions about or the properties about these things. So assumptions, they will go in the section. So for list, I did not need assumptions here, but for more complicated things, if you don't want to copy-paste assumptions for a bunch of lemmas, then you can put them in the section. My point is mainly to separate definitions, which look like that are independent from assumptions, from the rest in which you would happily use variables for types or assumptions and implicit types throughout, so that you have minimal noise when you quantify the arguments.
So the distinction you're making critically relies on the fact that we don't use dependent types.
Exactly.
Otherwise,
but I don't use dependent types. You get the point. Okay. So what do I need just to summarize things? I think I've already said. So there is this ambiguous past for type classes, the need for efficiency, and this question about what SS-reflect lessons can be learned or adapted to type classes. So we've discussed this.
What's inefficient about the DFS? I mean, it is DFS. You guys thinking about something? A different strategy?
No, I mean DFS. I mean, we need an efficient strategy, comma DFS like.
You mean iterative deepening?
Isn't it what is already?
That's what implemented, so that's why I'm asking. Oh, that's what I think is implemented. Maybe it's maybe you have a different experience. Or?
It's implementing DFS.
That's right.
I had the impression that it will, if you have different paths to produce something, would it cache all the intermediate forms that you've reached, so that if you reach again the same intermediate instance by a different path, you will not continue again from it?
So it's caching, that's all. You want to share branches of the search.
What I call DFS is an algorithm when you explore one branch and then you explore another branch, but you reach something that you already explored in the first branch, you will not continue the search from there. It's marking of the nodes that you go through, essentially, in the graph.
It's graph traversal rather than tree traversal.
Yeah, but typeless resolution.
I think you're doing tree traversal, to my knowledge.
Yeah.
Really? I'm talking about doing graph traversal instead.
But it's very hard to do.
We don't know how to compare nodes.
Yes.
I appreciate the issue. I'm just saying for particular instances like plus from NAT, you should be able to compare nodes.
Yeah, but you're never in the same environment. The universe can have grown. That's pretty horrible.
I'm happy to say that you need to make additional assumptions on the use cases so that you can implement these efficient algorithms. But when you're searching for instances for plus and NAT, you should be able to make reasonable assumptions.
Not even that. It can get into theoretical cases where the universes that you're using are suddenly inconsistent or something, and then you need to backtrack because. So that's.
I think backtracking for universe reason is probably a bad idea.
It may happen.
It means that you reach some some bad state.
But that's the usual problem about the difference between what users perceive about the whole universe mess and the actual thing that happens in.
Even just evars. Your evars will change.
Yes.
You will have a plus on x1 and you will find an instant and then you find plus on x2. Are they the same?
Sort of
Is
things
x2
he's using
somewhere?
would be much happier living in the old world of Coq, where universes were absolutely not checked until QED.
Yeah.
So if we could have a flag to say, oh, throw away all the universe checking during packet mode because we're not doing hot, that would help, I think, a large class
That
of
could be
users.
postponed. So be postponed to the end.
Yeah. Is that only
is
that only hot that's using polymorphic universes?
It's not.
In a way that they can hang themselves.
But it simplifies the fact that we do that in the tactic level, simplifies a lot of things in the kernel. It would probably allow to get parallel. Well,
This is not true.
well, not currently, but
Today.
today. But it could. It's a very good step towards a fully parallel computation of things in
But
the
that's
kernel.
also not true because so the problem with this is
Qui veut dire un truc.
You can continue.
the problem with this is that when you have a explicit you have implicit quantification of the universes for polymorphic constants, and then when you apply them, you have to guess the arity.
Yes,
And
yes.
You have no way of doing this.
No,
Yeah, but
saying
you can cache it.
We have explicit quantification.
Just.
That's implicit.
And you can cache it anyway. You can do just as what we do with the section stuff, the variables.
Anyway, that's not related.
Yeah, whatever.
I wanted to say, just to make a second one, if you look at what we're asking for as a name, that's called tabling, okay, that's caching, okay, and it has even been studied by Brigitte in the case where you are higher order, okay, so it exists, then it's complex and they didn't implement it in Wayland.
Yeah,
For example, it exists, so could be done, and I think maybe. Yeah.
You didn't dare say it, but
That we have the theory, for example, for the kind of cache ones.
For
The
all.
theory on paper.
For higher order logic, but not for something up to conversion, for example, or unification.
so
It's a negative, so you don't need to be complete. If you find a node that looks like the previous one, you fail. If you cannot see that it's actually convertible to the previous one, you will search.
So I think this is a very important point. I need efficiency for lookup that I know going to succeed. This solution fails as long as, because I'm always asking for instances that do exist, right? So I think this is a good point. It doesn't have to be complete in any sense.
And Cyril Cohen had an idea, I think, a hack to do that already. So.
It was a hack the first time you thought about it.
It's not a hack anymore.
I don't know.
And you can ask him.
Okay.
So for one, stapling is used typically in Prologish like languages to avoid looping, okay? Going over and over on the same code, so it's for usability.
Okay. So just so we can go to lunch. Regarding normalization, so auto rewrite is good. Is doing what I'm asking, except I have some efficiency issues in the corner. Or if I wanted to scale up, I will have some trouble.
But do you have any idea what's it's unexpected to you, the inefficiencies?
I do auto rewrite on an expression with, I don't know, 10 constants. And I have a database with 300 lemmas, but all indexed by the head constant. And for each head constant, I have like 5 possible lemmas.
Yeah, but the VNet is broken in auto rewrite.
Really, we went switch. You had
Oh, it's
How do we
updating.
index them?
It's updating.
Incroyable.
Ça veut dire que ce niveau, mise à jour aussi.
Incroyable.
Head of the left-hand side.
C'est l'heure du déjeuner, ça j'ai personne.
It's not used. Not auto rewrite. It's not used in auto rewrite.
This is the room where they have the big meetings.
Yeah, but they stop at 12:30. I think it's a feature, not a bug.
Yes.
Okay, it's time to lunch.
I had a quick question on your side.
Last sentence.
So, I want to have a mechanism for building the unions of auto-rewrite database bases. So I can give a name to a union of databases.
So it's your computer that went down?
Non, moi, il va très bien.
Here it looks like it's perfectly
Yeah, you just rebooting.
Just rebooting.
This is amazing. You
I
don't
can
even need to hack the system.
unplug and replug.
That's awesome. This is a challenge.
Ok, voilà. And so I had one last slide about extensions of the contents of TLC. So I'm motivated by program verification. So compared with what I have so far, I need some libraries for exponentiation and logarithms. I need more graph theory and matrix theory, and then more about numbers. And I'm not going to do all of this by myself. And yeah, I don't know what's the right path to adapt existing theories in the style that I need them. So that's an open question.
So thank you, Arthur. So I have two questions. The first one is I tried to put your library into the Coq continuous integration system, but it was not ported to the trunk version. So do you think it makes sense to add the library? It's something I would like to have personally.
I think it's now in a state where it could be put in continuous integration. The issue is whenever you break something, depending on where the thing is that you break, it might be a bit hard for someone else than me to explain why.
Yes, but it will be, for instance, I think putting your library into the CI will mean it's a very heavy use of type classes, for instance. So it will be a good test for type classes. So people doing changes to type classes, they will be then very constrained. If they break something, they will notice.
So I think it's especially useful for for changes that affect the running time, like significantly.
Oh, the running time. Yeah, this is still in project. I have good benchmarking. Yeah. We have, it's not very good. We have something, but it's not very automated. Yeah. But okay, but if you're interested, the only thing is, but yeah, usually goes the other way. Like once a library gets in, it's the Coq responsibility not to break it. So usually, unless the change is very justified, the policy is we don't break the library. But of course, only we can know if it's tested. But yes, so in a sense, it's not so expensive to maintain your library compiling with trunk, because in theory, changes that break it cannot go in.
I think with a new manager, policy, like release management that we have, it might be possible more than it used to be in the past.
Okay, so let's add it. Okay, cool. Let's add it.
And another request I would have is to have one of the hard auto-rewrite examples that you may not have in the library, but you may have that shows that puts the finger on the difficulty, so that people who would want to work on that.
But
I
was told at some point that it was kind of subsumed by rewrite strat.
Yeah, I think it's.
And last time I tried rewrite strat, it was 10 times slower, and I just couldn't compile my files to the end. But yeah, perhaps that's what needs to be.
So maybe a documentation. I mean, if it was 8.5, even the bottom strategy was bugged. Rewrite strat,
so now with the new version, it might be worth trying again with the new versions. Yeah. So it's a little project. On va déjeuner?
Gaëtan, tu as une question?
So how long does TLC take to compile?
Like 1.5 minutes.
Oh. 1.5 minutes. Well, they were related to my question. I know you are a user. Well, last time I looked, you were a user of the quick compilation of Coq, the VIO support. So how that has been working for you?
I will speak about it this afternoon.
Oh, okay.
I have one slide to explain what doesn't work and how to fix it.
Yeah, because I think it's still, will be good to hear, because we're trying to improve this a bit. And, yeah, okay. Merci.
Good.
Avant le repas, encore une question.
What do we do with many? How to collect all the So what you did, what Maastricht is doing, how to implement.
I have no answer for this.
We're kind of similar.
You mean you're asking about the comparison between accessory effects, naming strategies?
We're kind of in the same ballpark. One difference that I've decided to put predicates at the end of the statement rather than at the start because it does English. I typically don't have issues on equality limits because then otherwise rewrite lines start looking very blind, so issue and so on, and it's kind of not all that useful.
And what about the introduction lemmas? What names do you use to distinguish between the quality lemma and the introduction lemma?
Yeah, most. I don't have both, or there's some other. And the other, I guess the other thing is, I have the underscore in, and the underscore in, which tend to be written as with the that stands for characteristic properties. Sometimes the characteristic property is an equivalent. Sometimes it's one way or the other.
It's a one letter.
And if I have both of them, I'll use
So the reason I don't use lemmas is because I use CO2 a lot, so you need introduction lemmas is CO2 to work.
Yeah.
So I have all those statements.
Fair enough.
But yeah, apart from that, in many cases, you just go for the equality between consistence and then use the
Incohérence, also
Alors ça c'est comme
allez dehors tout le monde.
Dehors tout le monde.
Dans ce cas-là, c'est souvent utile de part.
Parce que tu continues à réécrire dans les. T'as avantage à garder la convention devant toi et continuer à réécrire.
Dans le cas de la réécriture, ouais, je suis d'accord. C'est pour ça que j'ai aussi l'égalité.
Donc, des fois, ça arrive de dire oui, en fait, on va effectivement montrer les deux branches séparément.